This is going to be long, so please, bear with me. I'm an Indian female, 19 now. I was born in Canada. My upbringing, or I guess you could say my conditioning, was strictly Indian. You know, the typical parents are always right. Yeah, that was instilled in me, like oxygen, ever since I was a little kid. My mother was an English teacher in a local high school, and that's when she met my father. Well, biological father, Steve. He was a charming guy, she used to say. He always had a bad boy vibe coming from him, and maybe that's what drew her to him. My mother too was a very pretty young lady with brown eyes. Her face was long and heart-shaped, with a very faintly prominent jawline. Her long lashes were a perfect complement to her complexion. These details are important because I have inherited the same facial features. Long story short, my mother ended up getting married to Steve. And she was 6 months pregnant with me when she discovered the horrific truth about him. He was a chronic pothead, and he owed several thousands of dollars to his dealer. When he told my mother, she was disgusted. 1, because she was an Indian, and we consider drugs as filth, and 2, because, well, she was going to be a mother, and with the father being so irresponsible, she was terrified for the future. My mother owned a car, which Steve wanted to sell to get the money. My mother was strictly against it because not only was it the only vehicle they had, but also because she was on a very critical stage of her pregnancy. She needed to attend her regular medical appointments to take the necessary injections, and she couldn't afford to get admitted to the hospital, so she had to visit there every now and then. And a pregnant woman, she can only walk so much, not 7 miles, at least. But he ended up selling it anyway. My mother had to walk for miles every time she had to take her injections, and it got even worse during her last month. Steve became more and more violent with my mother. It wasn't a big deal for her to get a few slaps out of nowhere, or a few deep blue bruises around her jawline every now and then. She didn't have anywhere else to go anyway. All the money she had was now blown by Steve on his drugs and alcohol, and he also lost his job. I'll cut all the gross details of my mother's abuse out, and I'll come to my part. I was delivered in September in 1997. The worst part, I was born in the attic. My mother had an infant to take care of now, and her job was unstable. Plus, her husband, well, he was just a very big helper. For 2 fucking years, he tortured my mother. He used to do things with her that you wouldn't even want your worst enemies to endure. Finally, my mother filed for a divorce, but due to her unstable job and economic conditions, my custody went to my father. He even went ahead to get a restraining order against her, and trust me, that really should never have happened. And me? Well, now I was his new victim. I could tell you what he did to my mother, because I went through the exact same torture. I was 4 years old when he won me, as he would say. And my mother endured him for 11 years. I wasn't a normal child. I was actually rather quiet. I used to stay angry all the time. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I ate my lunch alone in the stairway. But I was a straight-A student though, because I had to study to keep myself busy. I was a kid, and I was totally oblivious to the terrible nature of what was happening to me. Moreover, I was taught that adults, they're always right, no matter what. So every time I used to get a beating, I used to accept that it was my mistake and just let it be. The teachers wondered about me at times, I guess because I was often sent to the counsellor. I had deep bruises all over my body, and the uniform could only hide so much. I remember going days without having a grain of food, and only sometimes I used to get his leftovers. For the school lunch, I used to pack 2 pieces of bread, and for at least 2 years, I survived on 2 pieces of bread a day. After that, well, I started stealing money from him to get something to eat, and I bared with his torture for 8 years before I finally ran away. If you're wondering why he did these things to me, well, it was because I reminded him of my mother. I still remember the night I had enough of him. He was $2,000 short of his payment and had become a hooker addict too. I used to stay in my room all the time, but I could hear him and them. But this night, it was different. He brought home some men who were all heavily dressed in black clothes. They were huge, and they had a very dark vibe coming from them. My dad looked at me with disgust and ordered me to stay in my room until he comes out. I offered them some water, but I was hit right across my face and was told to burn in hell. I went to my room and sat on the ground with my calculus assignment that I had to submit tomorrow. Yes, an abused child actually does have other worries. I heard muffled whispers behind my door. I wasn't too worried though. It must have been my father. But then the door flung open and a loud thud startled me. To this day, I remember the dead look in his eyes and the wild, greedy eyes of his counterparts. I was confused and rather scared, I must say.
"What happened, Papa?"
I asked weakly.
"My friends want to talk to you." "How old are you?"
the tallest one asked.
12,
I said.
"Oh, good for us."
He then licked his lip and looked at his friend. I was beyond terrified now.
"You're perfect for our fun for the night,"
he said with lust. All the colour left my face as he used his eyes to look over my whole body.
"I'm not even attractive,"
I thought. Stupid, I know. He softly held my arm and began to speak, but I jolted my arm free from him and I stood up against the wall, scared. He was drunk. Well, all of them were. But this guy, he was angry too. I was trembling with fear, and soft sobs escaped my quivering lips. I always remained scared of everyone, but today it was different. I was beyond terrified. My heart was beating faster than usual. He held my arm strongly and jerked me towards him.
"You bitch! How dare you do that?"
He spat as he hit me with his bare hand right across my face.
"Do what?"
I managed to say in between heavy and uncontrollable sobs.
"I'll tell you what,"
he shouted and started opening his belt. His fellows were grunting and laughing like animals.
"No, please, don't hurt me,"
I begged, and like I always did, I apologized even though I didn't know what I had done wrong.
"Please, don't hurt me. I'm sorry, Papa. I won't do it again. Please, ask him not to hurt me. I swear, I won't do it again."
The tall guy opened his belt, and I thought that he was going to beat me with it like my father did at times. My eyes grew wider, and now the whole room was echoing with my sobs. I begged him and kept apologizing to him. I knew he was going to hurt me really badly, so I held my arms up against my face. I was unable to think straight, so all I did was stand there and cry. And after a few moments, I did the most sensible thing I could think of. I started shouting at the top of my lungs. My vision became blurry as warm tears escaped my eyes. What I saw next stays with me till this day. He had his junk out and was stroking it while laughing along with the others. It was a terrible laugh, like that of a hyena. I felt like throwing up. I wanted to just make this all stop. I just closed my eyes shut and kept crying. That maniac though, he was singing. I cried out for my dad, but he was there, laughing, and he didn't do anything. My own father. I was his blood. I was his child. My supposed superhero was there, watching me cry with a laugh. He was supposed to help me. He was my father. I looked at him and begged him to help me, and all he said was that I deserved it. The tall man held my hair and threw me on the ground. I was raped for half an hour, and these men, they took turns. My clothes and my body, they were soaked in blood. I was lying there, naked, curled in a ball, waiting to get consumed into nothingness, and my father, he was just standing there, watching me lose my innocence. I was his little girl. He was supposed to show me the world on his shoulders, but instead, he ruined it. I laid there, naked, for an hour, I guess. I started feeling numb. The happy faces of my friends with their parents started flashing before me.
Why can't my father be like them? I loved him. I did everything he said. I never even scored a B. Why?
After some time of laying there, I guess they'd left. I was alone, but for the first time, I actually felt lonely. I wanted to move, but all I could do was lay there. After almost another whole hour of misery, I decided to call someone. I remembered my mother's number. And before you ask, why not call authorities? I was hurt, and I didn't trust anyone. I wanted someone who was family. And although I knew I might get into trouble for touching the phone, I just wanted my mother. I called my mother, and I cried hard. I told her everything, and I asked her to come and help me. She told me that she was coming to get me, and after a few minutes, I passed out. I woke up in a hospital with a female police officer standing right next to me. The officer had a beautiful face, and her smile made me instantly feel at ease. The doctor, too, was a very sweet lady. I was admitted there by my mother, who now lived with my grandparents. She was sobbing, sitting on my left side, and looked at me with red eyes. I was interrogated and asked the most horrific questions. Okay, well, the questions weren't, but the answers, they were. Long story short, my father was arrested and was sent to jail along with his friends. I was tested upon for semen samples, and they matched. It's been years, and now that I've completed high school, I'm a criminal psychology student. My hands were shaking the whole time I typed this. But B-Buster, I want my story told. Not because I survived, but because I want people to know that they're not alone. There is hope. I want people to take the step of escaping and calling for help, which I didn't. I want to prevent anything like this happening to someone else. I want to save at least one person. And to the mothers enduring this torture, I want them to go out for help. And to the unfortunate victims, I know it seems impossible to get over it, but just know you're not alone. I now work with an Indian non-government organisation that helps the abused children, and even work alongside state police to help them unmask these assholes who ruin children. There will be a link in the description for anyone who wants to seek help.